Crimson Desert is an upcoming open-world action RPG from Pearl Abyss, creators of one of the more successful and controversial currently running MMOs on the market, Black Desert Online. Now, first revealed back in 2019 at Pearl Abyss Connect, this was said to be almost a spin-off, born of a desire to tell the story of Black Desert's past. Basically, the game started out as kind of a prequel to Black Desert Online. However, they said that as development continued, they felt the world, characters, and stories could stand on their own and decided to spin it off into its own game. Now, during that original announcement, they said that Crimson Desert was going to be a next-generation MMO, which was one of the main reasons that it caught my attention in the first place. A new MMO from the creators of Black Desert, which does get a ton of flack, most of which is justified with how progression is tied to monetization. But I also think the game does a lot right. There's a lot I love about BDO, from its world building, exploration, the action combat, the life skills and management systems. So much of this game I think is really well done. So the idea that Pearl Abyss would be making a brand new next generation MMO, that piqued my interest. During the announcement press conference, they specifically said, while playing through a series of highly engaging quests, missions, and multiplayer content, you'll be given the chance to nurture and grow your own mercenary group according to your own style of play, which I believe should be the case for any next generation MMO. Details about the game were kept fairly light. They said that they were aiming to deliver the ultimate gaming experience, building a world in true Pearl Abyss fashion, full of exploration with realistic characters, rich backgrounds, and thrilling action combat, all of which we got a tease of in the roughly 3-minute long reveal trailer. This was full of cinematic shots, narrative bits, and action sequences. But that was pretty much it. That was like all the information we got, and pretty much all we heard about the game for an entire year. Then they broke the silence in December 2020, releasing a brand new 5-minute gameplay trailer at the Game Awards. And although this was a bit framey at times, performance didn't look amazing, overall, it was pretty great looking, showcasing a ton of really cool systems and mechanics. They also released 2 separate developer interviews, which provided some more specific details about the game, and all of this just had me so much more interested. There was a lot that sounded and looked great about Crimson Desert, and let me dive into some of that stuff here. So we saw a bunch of panoramic shots displaying various areas of the open world. There were snow-capped mountains, forests, valleys, plains, rocks, and airy deserts, some of which were even dotted with medieval castles, cities, and towns. It was a lot of traditional fantasy, medieval-rooted stuff. We do know that Crimson Desert is an open world game, and if it functions like BDO, as I suspect it will, you're gonna be able to pretty much go anywhere that you can see. You can explore like everything in this map, at the very least, until you bump into those invisible walls near the edges. And seeing how massive these environments look and how dense these towns appear to be, that all had me really excited for the exploration alone. One of my favorite features actually in Black Desert, as small as this may sound, is the ability to mantle and climb literally everything, like jumping up onto the rooftops to get through town quicker, or when you're out in the wild and navigating enemy camps and strongholds. Now, being able to go around so freely is a really nice extra layer to the gameplay experience. We also saw a few close-ups of some of the bustling towns full of NPCs, who the developer said would be walking around, going about their daily lives, engaging in various activities. They're going to have these dialogue options and reputation systems. We can complete side tasks to help them out, unlocking rewards. Some of the other really neat features on display from that reveal gameplay trailer included these things called time dungeons. You will be entering these through portals, and they're going to take you to another dimension where you'll just do like typical RPG dungeon stuff, clearing packs of enemies and fighting bosses for loot. Speaking of bosses, apparently some bosses in the game will also unlock unique skills for you to use. In one clip, we saw a boss wielding lightning, and then after that, the player was able to imbue their weapon with that lightning effect. We saw the fact that there are various mounts for us to ride, including horses, canoes, and even dragons. There was a lot of different environmental interaction and exploration stuff, like this detective scan mode where you can search the environment for various clues. Tons of puzzle solving things with the player turning cranks and activating pressure plates. We saw that there's rope swings used to cross gaps and get to other climbable areas, even these sections with invisible bridges. There was also a ton of cutscenes in this trailer, which alluded to the game having a much stronger narrative focus, of course, than Black Desert does. But the really good stuff And what really has me most excited to this day for Crimson Desert is the combat system. So similar to Black Desert, Crimson Desert's combat centers on the use of really flashy action, tons of particles and quick effects, characters dashing around and striking enemies with like this flurry of attacks. However, the main difference in Crimson Desert is that there are a ton of ways to actually interact with the enemies that make combat more engaging. So like in Black Desert, you're mostly running around, gathering groups of enemies, and then lining up your cleave and area of effect abilities to strike them all at once. But you're not actually ever really interacting directly with the enemy as much as you're just targeting them with your abilities. Well, in Crimson Desert, there's actual like physical based interactions. So simply like you can raise your shield to block an attack. That's pretty basic. But what's more is that there's this entire grapple system with a lot of like martial arts and wrestling inspired moves. You're able to charge and tackle, pick up and throw, body slam, clothesline. There are like flying leg and roundhouse kicks that were inspired by Taekwondo, they said. The larger enemies in the game can even be mounted, letting you strike them from behind. You can grab hold of an enemy and then use them as a body shield to protect against projectiles. There are even coordinated attacks that you can perform with other mercenaries or real players, like picking up an enemy, tossing it to your friend, and then they can grab them midair and slam them on the ground. Enemies can drop their weapons, in which case they'll have to fight you barehanded or find another weapon to pick up. All sorts of moves and actions that have your character directly interacting with and manipulating enemies rather than just like doing attacks at them and then watching their health bars go down. It's all really cool stuff, and like while not necessarily new with mechanics along these lines being present in a lot of other action games, this was, as far as I'm aware, one of the deepest levels of direct character interaction with enemy NPCs that we had seen in any MMO. Because yeah, most MMOs you're tabbing onto a character and casting your abilities or doing your action abilities at them, but you're not actually like wrestling with them. There's no like physicality to it, but this game has a physicality with you doing different interactions with the enemy directly and moving them around. So it was pretty cool. Like this combined with a lot of the other systems and features that they showcased, all of that different environmental stuff, the puzzle solving, the world traversal, this all had me just super pumped for Crimson Desert. It really sounded like a true next generation MMO, but all of that changed around this time because during that Game Awards reveal, there was a noticeable difference in how they were describing the game. Specifically, any mention of MMO had been removed. Now they were saying Pearl Abyss's next flagship title, Crimson Desert, is an upcoming open world action adventure offering both a narrative-driven single player and multiplayer components where players can experience the game in their own way. So now, instead of calling Crimson Desert an MMO, they were saying it was single player with multiplayer elements, which was a little confusing because they were calling this a next generation MMO. Now, shortly after the Game Awards, Pearl Abyss actually released a developer roundtable where they discussed this change in genre, among other things, saying, "We wanted to show that the game offered something beyond the expected norms of an MMORPG. We wanted to give players the option to play with people they want in a multiplayer environment while delivering narrative." As to how the single player and multiplayer would actually work, they said that the main game would be focused on the journey and the story of Macduff. That is just the main character that we see in all of the trailers. That was single player only. However, there are parts of that where you can get help from other players. Now, presumably, this means that there will be like sections of the campaign that will include maybe shared world areas, or at the very least, the option to call in others for help. And given that the game focuses around like this band of mercenaries working together to solve their own problems and help people in the world, maybe it's as simple as something like being able to call in other real mercenary players. In fact, they went on in an interview to describe what happens once you're done the main campaign. They said that after that, you can switch to multiplayer and play the part that comes after Macduff's journey. In multiplayer mode, you can contact others while making your own story, and you can bump into others whenever you want. Levels, items, and skills will be shared between the single player and the multiplayer play. So So it looks like you're going to go through the single player campaign. There will be elements of the campaign where other players will come into play, where you can bump in or call in or however it functions other players. In that process, you'll be leveling, you'll be gearing up, getting skills, unlocking new gear and weapons and all that stuff. And then you can take those things and carry it into multiplayer, where I'm assuming, based on how it's all described, you'll be playing as a mercenary just with all of the stuff that you had on Macduff. I'm going to be interested to how exactly that works. Basically sounds like the game is going to have the option of being shared world, utilizing that mercenary system for other real people to play alongside anyone else who's going through their campaign as Macduff. They touched on this further, saying the initial frame of playing in units of mercenaries with the protagonist and those around him has not changed significantly. What we haven't decided yet for sure is how far users can play as a mercenary. As mentioned earlier, Crimson Desert is being developed in a different form from your typical MMORPGs. And what's really interesting to me here is that even though they are no longer calling this an MMO explicitly, and they've even removed any mention of that genre from their website, from their YouTube videos, and from every other official channel, there is still quite clearly a heavy multiplayer and MMO-like components, maybe more so along the lines of an MMO light, or like I said, a shared world game, but mixing in these main characters and mercenary elements. Now, there were some follow-up interviews in early 2021 after the 2020 Game Awards that went a little bit further to paint a clearer picture of what we can expect and some of the different multiplayer elements, which actually also does include PvP. When asked about PvP in raids, they said, "I can't reveal too much, but I can tell you that one of the distinctive multiplayer content is siege warfare. In Crimson Desert, these are not just massive battles. Players will have unique experience of utilizing their own bands of mercenaries. Each member of that band will have a different role, like providing resources or supporting the battle in different ways." They also said that this RVR type mode will function a bit differently than what you see in traditional MMOs, but just the fact that they're talking and planning on having any sort of competitive multiplayer in this game is really interesting to me. And it seems so fitting, this idea of these groups of mercenaries working together and battling for resources or the control of these areas. Maybe there are zones, maybe kind of like New World, where there will be zones where bands of mercenaries will fight for control of, and then they'll have influence and get bonuses within those regions. Just maybe do it a little bit better than how Amazon handled it in New World. In another interview, they even added, saying, "Although sieges will exist, players may find that they differ from existing forms of faction versus faction sieges. We are preparing various types of PvP content and large-scale battles, such as the siege battle shown in our gameplay trailer. It is, however, too early to comment on the scale of participants for such content, as the content is still in development." Now, if you're wondering why like the waffling and why the shift from being called a full-on MMO, a next-gen MMO, to this action game with what appears to be many like MMO adjacent features, it looks like it really just boils down to the simple fact of them wanting to deliver a certain game experience when it comes to the gameplay and the game's performance. They said that they want to maintain a certain level of visual fidelity, performance, and this highly interactive combat system while not dealing with the possible latency issues that a full-on MMO could bring. In fact, speaking of performance, they were addressed and asked about this in several interviews, and they said that while there were obvious frame drops in the trailer, they are aware and they're not too worried, as the game is still in development, and they are confident that they can iron out any performance issues prior to launch. Now, there were a handful of other interviews around this time of the Game Awards reveal, like late 2020, early 2021. But then after that, things were pretty quiet for several months, up until July 2021 when they announced a delay. We are currently hard at work developing Crimson Desert, which is rapidly evolving with new adventures and exciting experiences. However, we have decided that we need to dedicate more time to adding new ideas for an even deeper, more enriching game. They went on to say that they were delaying the launch from the originally planned 2021 release window, and that they would provide an updated schedule at some point in the future. Then, in September, they tweeted out an image in celebration of the autumn harvest festivals around the world, and that was the last official correspondence about Crimson Desert To this day, over 1 year later, there have been 0 updates for Crimson Desert. And although no official updates specifically about the game have come out, earlier in the year, Pearl Abyss did have a showcase of their engine, which Crimson Desert is being developed on, and this put on display some really cool environmental effects that we look to be getting in Crimson Desert, showing the character moving through snow and patches of leaves and how that movement interacts with the world, even showing changing weather conditions, going from like a calm spring to a light rain to this heavy extreme storm and then snow rolling in. And we also saw interactions with things like heavy wind and rain and how that affects the environments with the moving of foliage and trees and things along those lines. But still, no big updates. Now that said, as of now, the game is still technically scheduled for release in 2022. How likely is that to happen? I mean, it doesn't look great because, as mentioned, beyond this game engine showcase, there have been no official Crimson Desert updates, no blog posts, no videos, no tweets in over a year. That's a long time to be radio silent about the game. And given that it is currently August and we still don't even have a target release month, I am not holding my breath that this game's going to come out in 2022. On the bright side, though, we do have confirmation that Crimson Desert will be getting some showcase at this year's Gamescom, which takes place in Cologne, Germany later in the month. Pearl Abyss will be having a public-facing booth that lets people check out their current game, Black Desert Online. But more interestingly is that they will be reportedly be doing a behind-the-scenes hands-on event for members of the press to, quote, verify the game quality, basically to let people know that the game still exists. And on top of that, a few weeks ago during their recent earnings call, Pearl Abyss did confirm that development of Crimson Desert was going smoothly and that they plan to showcase a brand new 10-minute gameplay trailer at some point this year. So if this doesn't happen at Gamescom, my guess would be that it happens at the 2022 Game Awards. But either way, we should be seeing more about Crimson Desert pretty soon. And I gotta say, despite the change in genre going from an MMO to an open world RPG that has like a lot of MMO-like elements, I am still incredibly excited for Crimson Desert. I think the game looks fantastic, visually speaking. Performance obviously needs some work, but they've addressed that, and hopefully that comes to fruition. Hopefully part of the delay and the year's worth of radio silence was to work on stuff like that in addition to whatever content that they're adding. And even though they are refusing to call it an MMO, I mean, they're going to be having PvP and siege warfare. They're going to be having all these MMO elements and this post-campaign stuff. It's not exactly going to be the experience that a lot of traditional MMO players expect. Because you're going to apparently just be starting off as a single player campaign, playing through Macduff's story, and then swapping into the multiplayer elements. But it seems like it could be pretty interesting. And like I said, it's got plenty of problems, especially around monetization, but there's a lot that I really liked about Black Desert Online. And I'm interested to see this take that they're going to be doing and approaching a new type of game with this more in-depth, this more physical action combat. It just sounds really cool. I think this game sounds really cool. It's on the short list of games that I'm really looking forward to coming out within the next couple of years or so. So there you go. That does it for this overview, this checking out of Crimson Desert. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Looking forward to hearing more about the game later this year. Thank you as always for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.